The most devastating anguish that Rudolf Steiner repeatedly found in people who came to him for spiritual guidance was not from individuals who had obviously failed in life through addiction, crime, or flagrant neglect of responsibilities, but was from people who had done everything society and culture told them was right, studied diligently, obtained respectable degrees, built stable careers, married appropriately, had children when expected, maintained impeccable reputations, fulfilled all social and moral obligations. And yet, they experienced a deep and persistent emptiness that no amount of external achievement could fill, a disturbing feeling of living someone else's life instead of their own authentic life, an inexplicable feeling of having lost something crucial without knowing exactly what was lost or where to look. These people often describe the experience as walking down a long, narrow corridor with high walls on both sides without windows or doors, following diligently in a straight line because they had been taught that this was the right way. But as they walked further and further, they felt increasing discomfort that perhaps the entire corridor was oriented in completely the wrong direction, and that by obediently following rules of staying in the corridor, they were actually moving further and further away from the destination that the soul truly longed to reach, but that consciousness could not clearly articulate, because they had been trained from early childhood to ignore whispers, interiors of authenticity in favor of exterior commands of conformity. Steiner saw this phenomenon not as an individual defect of specific people, nor as a psychological problem that could be corrected through conventional therapy by better adjusting the person to social expectations, but as a collective spiritual crisis of modern materialistic civilization that systematically trains people from birth to live from the outside and following external scripts of success, instead of living from the inside out, following authentic impulses of unique spiritual individuality. That each soul brought into incarnation for specific purposes that completely transcend categories of success defined by society, focused only on material acquisition, social status, and conformity to norms. Established, the fundamental root of this existential crisis of feeling lost despite doing everything right according to Steiner lies in the complete inversion that modern civilization has operated between what he called the true path versus the false path of human development. True path, as it existed in traditional cultures before scientific materialism completely dominated collective worldview, was path of inner development where person from youth was encouraged to seek deep self-knowledge through contemplative practices, to discover unique vocation through attention to natural inclinations and innate talents, to develop spiritual life through connection with transcendent dimensions of reality, and to contribute to community through expression of unique gifts that soul specifically brought to offer the world in this particular incarnation. This true inside-out path assumed that each human being is a unique spiritual individuality with specific destiny and purposes that must be discovered through an inner journey of self-discovery rather than being imposed through uniform outer expectations applied identically to all. In contrast, the false path that modern civilization imposes is an outside-in path where children from an early age are taught to ignore inner impulses of authenticity and to conform to outer expectations. Standardized educational system teaches same curriculum to everyone, regardless of individual interests or talents. Social pressures push everyone towards careers considered prestigious or profitable, regardless of authentic vocations. Cultural propaganda constantly bombards with messages about how it should be, what it should want, who it should try to become, all based on materialistic values of consumption, status, and conformity, rather than spiritual values of authenticity, purpose, and unique contribution. A person who diligently follows this false path by doing everything that society says is right inevitably reaches a point where external achievements that he has accumulated do not bring expected satisfaction because they were achieved through betrayal of authentic self, and the emptiness he feels is a literal emptiness where there should be a living presence of genuine spiritual individuality, but that has been suppressed and denied through years of conforming to expectations that were never authentically his own. The second crucial cause of this sense of loss and disorientation is what Steiner described as spiritual amnesia. Itual, induced through materialistic education that systematically teaches people to disregard or even deny realities of spiritual dimensions of existence that the soul knew intimately before incarnating. According to Steiner's anthroposophical perspective, each human being is not merely a product of genes and environment, but is an immortal spiritual individuality that has lived multiple previous incarnations, accumulating experiences and developing capabilities over millennia, and that before incarnating in the current physical body existed in spiritual dimensions where he had a clear vision of specific purposes and objectives that he intended to achieve in this particular life. Incarnation as consciousness descends from spiritual dimensions to the physical world through the maternal body, The veil of forgetfulness naturally falls over memories of prenatal existence and previous lives because consciousness must focus completely on learning to operate the physical body and navigate the material world. This temporary forgetfulness is necessary and healthy in the early stages of life, allowing the child to develop without being burdened by knowledge of multiple lives and complex spiritual planes. Remembrance, where through meditation, fasting, vision questing, or other spiritual practices, could regain access to memories of purposes that soul brought into incarnation, allowing one to orient adult life according to these purposes rather than merely reacting to external pressures. Remains in spiritual amnesia throughout his entire life, never regaining knowledge of who he really is on a soul level, nor of why he chose to incarnate at this particular moment, nor of what unique contribution he came to offer, and consequently, he lives his entire life following external scripts without ever connecting with an inner source of authentic purpose that could give genuine meaning to existence. The third fundamental dimension is what Steiner called the disconnection of spiritual biography, where one lives only on the horizontal surface of external events, without understanding the vertical dimension of spiritual meanings that connect events in a coherent pattern revealing progressive soul development through specific lessons. When a person looks at his or her life only through a materialistic lens, he or she sees a succession of seemingly random events. Born into this family, attended these schools, had these jobs, met these people, experienced these successes and failures, with no intrinsic connection between them other than accidental chronological sequence. But according to the spiritual perspective that Steiner taught through biographical work, each significant life event is not an accident, but is a manifestation of the soul's evolutionary needs, magnetically attracting specific circumstances that offer precise opportunities for learning and development that the soul needs at a particular stage of the journey through multiple incarnations. Encounters with certain people are not coincidences, but are karmic reunions of souls who have interacted in previous lives and have unresolved issues to work on or mutual lessons to learn. Apparent successes that society celebrates may be, from the soul's point of view, problematic deviations from an authentic path, while failures that society regrets may be necessary redirections, correcting course toward a true destiny. When a person does not understand this vertical dimension of spiritual meanings, connecting events into a coherent narrative of soul development, life appears chaotic and meaningless, even when outwardly successful according to social criteria. And the feeling of being lost is literal because a person has no spiritual map showing where they are on the larger journey, nor where they should be going beyond superficial goals of accumulating more money, status, or material comfort that never satisfy. Spiritual hunger for authentic meaning transcending temporary gratifications. The fourth crucial cause is the tragic separation between work and calling that industrial capitalism has wrought, where the overwhelming majority of people work in jobs that have no organic connection to the unique gifts and spiritual purposes that the soul has brought to manifest in this incarnation. In traditional pre-industrial societies, work typically continued a traditional family vocation, transmitted through generations, where young people learned trades from parents and grandparents in an apprenticeship process that not only taught technical skills, but also transmitted cultural values and a sense of connection with ancestral lineage and community. And even when a person did not follow a family vocation, choice of trade was typically based on observation of natural inclinations and talents evident from childhood that were cultivated through apprenticeship with a master who saw unique potential in an apprentice. This alignment between work and authentic vocation meant that a person spent most of their waking hours engaged in activities that expressed something essential of their own nature, and that contributed significantly to the well-being of the community, creating a sense of purpose and belonging that nourished the soul even when work was physically arduous. Modern capitalist civilization has completely severed this organic connection between work and vocation through extreme division of labor, where tasks are fragmented into repetitive operations with no intrinsic meaning, and through labor markets that force people to accept any available job, regardless of alignment with natural inclinations or soul purposes, transforming work into a mere economic necessity to earn money to survive, rather than an expression of authentic vocation contributing to collective good. A person who spends 40 or more hours a week for decades in work that has no connection with who they really are on a soul level inevitably experiences profound alienation and a feeling of wasting precious life on meaningless activities, even when work is well paid and socially prestigious, because money and status never completely compensate for the betrayal of authentic self that occurs when a person sells time and vital energy for purposes that do not resonate with the deep values and purposes of spiritual individuality. The fifth important dimension is what Steiner described as the tyranny of groupthink, where a person completely internalizes the values, beliefs, and goals of the dominant culture without ever critically questioning or examining them in relation to the inner truths of one's own soul, resulting in a life where one is constantly seeking external approval and social validation, rather than following the inner guidance of authentic conscience. Modern civilization, through standardized education, ubiquitous media, constant advertising, and pressures of social conformity, operates as a massive system of indoctrination that conditions people from childhood to accept, without question, certain fundamental premises about what constitutes a successful life. Accumulating material wealth, achieving high social status, consuming products that signal membership in desirable classes, marrying and having children according to conventional schedules, maintaining appearances of happiness and success even when inner reality is empty and miserable. A person who completely internalizes these values without ever subjecting them to critical examination by comparing them with the inner truths of his own soul lives his entire life pursuing goals that he does not actually genuinely desire, but has been conditioned to desire through years of repetitive cultural messages. And when he achieves these goals through arduous effort and sacrifice of authenticity, he discovers with horror that achievements do not bring promised satisfaction because they were never authentically his own, but were imported from outside through uncritical conformity to cultural expectations. Groupthink works like a psychological prison where a person does not even realize that they are imprisoned because everyone around them is also imprisoned, and considers prison as an inevitable natural reality. And only when a person develops the courage to question fundamental premises that everyone around them accepts without question can they begin to glimpse the possibility of a different existence, aligned with authentic values emerging from the depths of the soul instead of the superficialities of cultural conditioning. The sixth profound cause is loss of connection with natural rhythms and cosmic cycles that should regulate human life, maintaining synchronization with larger temporal patterns, giving a sense of belonging to the universal order, transcending immediate individual concerns. Steiner emphasized that the human being is not an isolated entity, but is a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm and participating in cosmic processes through resonance with rhythms that structure the universe. Alternation of day and night should correspond to the rhythm of wakefulness and sleep. The lunar cycle should influence emotional states and physical processes. Annual seasons should mark distinct phases of external activity versus internal introspection, and even longer planetary cycles should correspond to phases of biographical development extending over decades. Traditional cultures maintained a conscious connection with these rhythms through and seasonal festivals, lunar rituals, observation of celestial movements, and organization of daily life according to natural cycles, creating a sense of participation in a greater cosmic order that gave meaning and context to individual existence. Modern civilization, with artificial lighting allowing round-the-clock activity, artificial climate control maintaining constant temperature regardless of season, out-of-season food availability, eliminating connection to agricultural cycles, and frenetic pace of urban life completely ignoring celestial movements systematically disconnects people from natural rhythms that should anchor existence in universal temporal order. The result is that the person lives in abstract linear time without significant natural markers, creating a feeling that days simply repeat themselves monotonously without qualitative variation or progression towards something greater, contributing to the feeling of being lost because there is no anchoring in natural cyclical patterns that could provide guidance on where the person is in the great breadth of a year or a lifetime. The solution that Steiner offered to the existential crisis of feeling lost despite doing everything right was not merely adjusting a person to better conform to social expectations, nor was it offering superficial self-help techniques to achieve material success more efficiently. But it was inviting a person on a radical journey of spiritual awakening that requires extraordinary courage to fundamentally question every life orientation that has been constructed, following external scripts, and to embark on a profound process of self-discovery that may require abandoning external achievements that took years to build, but that are founded on a false foundation of values imported into instead of authentic truths of the soul. This process of reorientation necessarily begins with honest recognition that the feeling of being lost is not a problem to be fixed through more effort in the same direction, but is a healthy sign of the soul signaling that the path followed until now is fundamentally wrong, and that a radical change of direction is necessary even if frightening. Steiner developed with each person who came to seek him personalized program of spiritual practices and inner development exercises designed specifically to help a person regain connection with spiritual dimensions of existence that had been suppressed through years of materialistic conditioning, meditation practices to calm incessant mental chatter and create inner space where the soul's voice could be heard, concentration exercises to strengthen ability to focus attention deliberately rather. then being swept away by random associations, systematic biographical work, reviewing life events, looking for patterns and spiritual meanings that connect events, in coherent narrative of soul development, daily retrospective practices, before bed, reviewing the day's events in reverse order by observing emotional and behavioral patterns, deliberate cultivation of specific virtues through self-observation and conscious correction of habitual tendencies, and gradually more advanced exercises to develop supersensitive perception of etheric and astral dimensions of reality that are as real as physical dimensions, but which remain invisible to ordinary untrained perception. Through these exercises, practiced disciplinedly over months and years, a person gradually regains access to dimensions of self that have been suppressed, begins to hear soul whispers indicating authentic purposes and true calling that may be radically different from the path that has been followed until now based on conformity to external expectations. The most profound transformation that occurs through this process of spiritual awakening is not merely a change in external circumstances, although these often change dramatically as a person begins to live authentically, but is a fundamental shift of the center of gravity of inner life from external location in the opinions and approval of others to internal location in direct knowledge of one's own truth, achieved through connection with spiritual dimensions of individuality. A person who previously navigated life by constantly checking whether they were doing the right thing by external standards and feeling anxious when approval was not received gradually develops inner certainty based not on arrogance or indifference to feedback from others, but on direct knowledge gained through spiritual practices that they are aligned with authentic soul purposes, even when choices do not make sense to others operating according to completely different values. This inner certainty is not dogmatic rigidity, but is fluid flexibility rooted in living connection with an inner source of guidance that can adapt creatively, face changing circumstances without losing touch with the essential core of truth that remains constant through all changes. The feeling of being lost that was previously distressing is replaced by a sense of being on a journey where not knowing exactly where you're going is a natural part of the discovery process, rather than a problem to be eliminated through rigid planning based on externally imposed objectives. One learns to trust an unfolding process where each step reveals the next step rather than requiring a complete life map before taking the first step. And this trust is based not on naive optimism, but on experience accumulated through years of practice that when one follows authentic inner guidance, even when it does not make rational sense or is socially approved, life consistently opens doors and offers opportunities that would not be accessible through following conventional paths of conformity. The final promise that Steiner offered is that it is never too late to change direction and begin living authentically, even when one has already invested decades following the wrong path and has accumulated external achievements and commitments that seem impossible to abandon. Every person he encountered at various stages of life, from young adults to elderly people close to death, had the capacity to awaken to the truth of one's own spiritual nature, and to make necessary changes to align outer life with inner reality, even when changes required significant sacrifices of material comfort, social status, or security that took years to build. The crucial thing was to recognize that remaining life, no matter how short, is infinitely more valuable when lived authentically than any amount of time lived in conformity to external expectations, betraying true self, and that soul does not measure success of incarnation by material standards of accumulated wealth or positions achieved, but by degree of fidelity to spiritual purposes it is brought to manifest and by quality of inner development achieved through consciously working with challenges that life has presented. People who made radical changes late in life by abandoning established careers to pursue authentic vocations, leaving comfortable but soulless relationships to pursue genuine connections, or simply changing inner guidance from seeking external approval to following inner guidance consistently reported that their greatest regret was not having wasted time following the wrong path, but rather having continued on it until death, without ever having the courage to change, and that the joy of finally living authentically, even for a relatively short time, infinitely outweighed any comfort or security from continuing on the false path. The path that followed doing everything right according to social standards was actually wrong if measured by soul standards, but recognition of this truth, instead of being a reason for despair, can be a liberating turning point where true life finally begins, through the courage to question everything that has been assumed, and to embark on a journey of self-discovery that is scary because it requires abandoning false certainties of conformity. But that is the only journey that can lead to authentic satisfaction, and a sense of purpose that transcends material circumstances, proving unshakable even in the face of challenges because it is rooted in truth lived inwardly instead of externally held opinions. The most radical dimension of Steiner's message is that what society calls doing everything right often means, from a spiritual point of view, doing everything wrong because success criteria that materialistic society imposes are fundamentally inverted by valuing exactly those things that are least important for soul development, accumulation of material possessions that cannot be taken through death, and that often distract from inner growth, pursuit of power over others that inflates ego. Rather than developing it spiritually, building social reputation that depends on the opinions of others instead of inner integrity, search for sensory pleasures that gratify the body but do not nourish the soul. According to an authentic spiritual perspective, doing truly right means prioritizing development of soul qualities that transcend material circumstances and persist through death to future incarnations. Courage to live authentically even when socially disapproved, genuine compassion that extends to all beings, without expectation of reciprocity, wisdom gained through deep reflection on experiences rather than the mere accumulation of information, selfless love that gives without calculating. Return, creativity that expresses oneness of spiritual individuality rather than imitating external models of success. A person who develops these qualities, even living in circumstances, modest material possessions, without social recognition, is truly doing right by soul criteria and will experience deep satisfaction that transcends external circumstances, while a person who accumulates all the material and social achievements that civilization celebrates but who completely neglects inner development will inevitably experience a growing void that no amount of external success can fill because he is doing it wrong. By criteria that really matter to the immortal soul, who will persist far beyond the present life, carrying only developed qualities and lessons learned, while leaving behind all material possessions and social positions that were so important during life, but which they turn out to be completely worthless from the point of view of eternity. The journey of reorientation from the wrong path followed through conformity to the right path, discovered through authenticity, is not a single process of dramatic conversion, but is a gradual development that unfolds through multiple phases over years as a person progressively frees himself from conditioning and awakens to deeper dimensions of self-truth. First phase typically involves initial awakening, where the person begins to seriously question for the first time whether the path they are following is truly their own, or whether it has been imported through conformity to external expectations. This questioning can be triggered by crisis, such as serious illness, loss of a loved one, unexpected professional failure, or simply by gradual accumulation of discomfort, with growing emptiness that external successes cannot fill. Second phase involves active exploration, where the person seeks alternatives through reading spiritual literature, experimenting with contemplative practices, talking to others who have made similar journeys, and especially through beginning to pay attention to inner impulses and synchronicities that seem to guide in specific directions that rational logic cannot explain, but that intuition recognizes as significant. Third phase requires courage to begin making concrete changes in outer life, to align with truths discovered within, even when change is scary, because it requires abandoning security of known in favor of uncertainty of unknown. It may involve leaving established career to pursue authentic calling, even with no guarantee of financial success, ending relationship that is comfortable but soulless to create space for genuine connection, or moving to new place that resonates with something deep even, without clear logical reason. The fourth phase involves deepening and refinement as the person continues to develop spiritual capabilities through disciplined practices, navigating inevitable challenges that arise when living authentically in a world that values conformity and progressively integrating spiritual dimensions with practical life, so that spirituality is not a separate compartment but permeates all areas of existence. This process of reorientation is a lifetime's work that never completely ends because there are always deeper layers of authenticity to discover and integrate. But each phase brings greater alignment between outer life and inner truth, resulting in a progressive reduction in feelings of being lost as the person develops inner certainty based on direct connection to a spiritual source of guidance that transcends all external voices of conformity and conditioning. The permanent invitation that Steiner's work offers is for each person to have the courage to question whether the path they are following, doing everything that society says is right, is really leading towards the destiny that the soul authentically longs to achieve, or whether it is leading in a completely opposite direction, moving further and further away from the true purposes that they brought to manifest in this incarnation. This questioning is not merely an intellectual exercise, but requires brutal honesty with yourself, recognizing when you are living a life of appearances, maintaining a facade of success while inside you're empty, when you are seeking approval from others instead of following your own truth, when you're sacrificing authenticity on the altar of material security or social status. The answer to this question may be disturbing, revealing that years or even decades were invested in building a life based on a false foundation of imported values. But this disturbance is necessary and healthy because it is the first step towards the freedom to start living authentically, even if late. The feeling of being lost, that seemed like a problem to be eliminated, turns out to be a healthy sign of a soul refusing to conform completely to a false path, and keeping alive the flame of the yearning for authenticity that society systematically tries to extinguish through conditioning since childhood. The final question is not if you have done everything right by external standards, but if you are truly doing it right by soul standards that are unique to you and can only be discovered through an inner journey of deep self-knowledge that requires the courage to question everything, the patience to practice spiritual disciplines gradually transforming consciousness, and the faith that when you follow authentic inner truth, even when scary and socially frowned upon, life eventually organizes itself around that truth in ways that could neither be predicted nor planned, but that turn out to be exactly right when lived. You have gone down the wrong path, not because of moral failure or lack of intelligence, but because you have been trained from birth to value external approval over inner truth, material success over spiritual growth, safe conformity over risky authenticity. And now that you recognize fundamental misguidance, you can consciously choose to change direction rather than continue on the same trajectory, hoping that it will eventually lead to the satisfaction that consistently fails to materialize. The courage needed to make this change is not the courage of a hero conquering external enemies, but is the deeper and more difficult courage to honestly confront oneself, to admit when one is wrong even after years of investment, to abandon identity built through external achievements in favor of authentic identity emerging from the depths of the soul, and to live with the uncertainty of not knowing exactly where the journey will lead, but trusting that the path discovered through authenticity will lead to a destiny truer than any destiny planned through conformity to external scripts never authentically one's own, but only superficially adopted, through years of conditioning that can now be questioned, challenged, and transcended, through the spiritual awakening that Steiner mapped out as a real and achievable possibility for every person willing to do the necessary inner work, transforming consciousness from autopilot operating according to external programming to awakened consciousness, sailing according to inner pole star of authentic truth, shining eternally awaiting recognition through the courage to look inward rather than always outward seeking validation that never completely satisfies because it comes from the wrong source.